Thank you for tuning into Balanced Black Girl. My name is Les. I'm your host, and I appreciate you tapping in. So, if you did not listen to our last episode, you may not know that we're doing a solo episode summer. So, I've been doing this show for almost 6 years. I've been doing a mix of solos and interviews ever since I started. And the consistent piece of feedback that I have gotten from people who listen to the show is I really like your interviews, but I love your solos. Give us more solos. And so I'm giving the people what they want, and I'm giving solos all summer long, talking about wellness, continuing our summer glow up, like I talked about in the solo episode we had a few weeks ago, and just life and ways that we can all find a little bit more balance with where we are at. So, a quick housekeeping note. If you are listening to this or if you are watching this, can you do me a favor and can you subscribe to this podcast? Whether you are on Apple, you can hit the little plus sign, which is follow. If you are on Spotify, you can subscribe there. They make it really obvious. Or if you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe to the channel. It takes literally the tap of a button and it helps the show so much. I have a lot of big, audacious personal goals to really grow this show and to get it in front of as many people as possible because I really think that our content here is life-changing and life-giving, but it's hard for me to do that if people don't see it. And so if you subscribe, that helps more people see it. It comes in your feed every time I come out with new episodes, and it tells the algorithms at Spotify and at Apple that people like the show, and it helps serve the show to more people. So that is my one ask. If you enjoy this show, please make sure you're subscribed. And if you feel extra inspired, leave us a 5-star rating because we're 5-star girlies. Okay, so housekeeping things out of the way. I'm really excited to talk to you today about how to start over in your 30s. And I was very specific about the title of this episode, about starting over in your 30s, as opposed to just starting over in general, because I think that there is something about our 30s that is just such a unique time in our lives. Even if you aren't 30 yet, you can still listen. You can get so much to pull away from this episode. Even if you're in your 40s and in your 50s, absolutely it can still apply to you. But there's just something about the 30s. It is this really interesting in-between time in our lives that can feel so awkward because when you're in your 30s, you are still young, despite what TikTok may lead you to believe. Your 30s are still incredibly young, but it's also old enough to have the stakes be a little bit higher. And sometimes making changes in your life, even if it's something that you really want, can feel particularly scary in your 30s and beyond, because there's more to lose. There's more at stake. You've maybe put a little bit more time into building something, and to walk away from that can feel a little bit more challenging. So I'm really excited to talk to you about this today, really talking about my own personal experience starting over a few times now in my 30s. I'm not even halfway through my 30s, or I'm coming up on being halfway done with my 30s, and I have now started over a couple of times in this short almost 5 years, and I have learned a lot. And I'm definitely not here to tell you what to do. I can't necessarily speak to your specific situation. And I, as much as I like to think of myself as your friend, am truly a stranger on the internet. So do not uproot your life based on anything I say. But I do think that there's so much value in sharing our experiences. And I've had some really interesting experiences over the past few years. I have learned so much, and I am excited to share it with you because hopefully it will be helpful and will inspire your own journey. And this episode was also largely inspired by a few videos that I had shared on social media. I had shared a video on TikTok. I think I also shared it on Instagram. I also shared it on LinkedIn, talking a little bit, a very Cliff Notes version, about my experience starting over in my 30s, particularly moving to new cities and making career changes. That has been my version of starting over, but there's so many ways that you can start over. And I got so many questions, so many requests to turn it into a longer episode. And I thought, okay, solo episode summer is a perfect time to really dig into this. So first, I want to talk about what it means to start over. Oftentimes, when we think about starting overs, we can think about really extreme examples. Some of the ways that I've started over is I've relocated states a couple of times. I have gone full-time into entrepreneurship, and I have made some pretty drastic career pivots. And those are definitely examples of starting over, but that isn't the only way that you can start over. Starting over can look so many different ways. It can look like changing your environment. It can look like changing your career. It can look like going back to school. It can look like leaving a long-term relationship. It can look like ending a friendship and embarking on building new community. But it can also entail just changing your mindset and changing your perspective and choosing to move through the world differently, no matter where you are. And I think that that last point about really changing your mindset and changing the way that you do things and changing the way that you show up in the world to get a different result, that is really the magic when it comes to starting over. And I would even argue that that is the more important part. I think that when you're able to shift your mindset, when you're able to shift your behavior, when you're able to examine, okay, is what I'm doing getting me to where I want to be, and start making changes with how you talk to yourself, how you treat yourself, how you move about the world, that to me is a far bigger change than changing your environment. Because no matter where you go, there you are. You're going to meet yourself where you're at. So you can move out of the country, you can quit your job, you can eat, pray, love, and you can do so many different things from any corner of the world. But if you don't ever examine who you are and what you want and why you do the things that you do, or you don't ever release the things that are no longer serving you or that you no longer need, you're just going to repeat the same cycles and the same things, but in a different location. So that mindset stuff, that brain rewiring, that learning how to view things differently and learning how to behave differently is going to be so much more valuable than moving or quitting a job ever will. And I do think that those big changes like moving or starting a new career are often the byproduct of changing your behavior first if you do it right. So I don't think that everybody has to move. I don't think everybody has to quit their job. I don't think everybody should do those things. Last summer when I was in Seattle, which is where I'm from and where I spent a good portion of my life, and we'll talk about that later on in this episode, but I was in Seattle and I was going for a walk with a girlfriend of mine. She is also from that area and she has chosen to stay there. We met in college. We went to college in the area. She has started her career there. She now owns a home and she's just created a really beautiful life for herself. And she really likes it. She likes still living there. She hasn't really had a desire to move to another city. And that's incredible. And we were talking about that. And she was saying, sometimes I wonder, am I settling because I stayed here? I like my life. I like my career. I like my house. But should I try to do something different? Does that mean that I'm settling because I've never left? And what I said to her was, I think that settling is a feeling, not an action. I don't think that there's anything wrong with staying in your hometown or staying where you are if you feel happy and fulfilled. And if you like the life that you have created there, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. There is no need to move across the country or to do anything drastic if you like the life that you have created for yourself. I did an episode called Stop Settling last fall, and we'll link it in the show notes, but we explore more about how to figure out what it is that you want and learning how to listen to that own inner voice and those own desires that you have, because I think that that is what is really key here. So for a lot of people, when they think they want to start over, it's important to examine, why do you want to start over? What is maybe the missing piece, or what is not serving you with where you're currently at? What is it that you are unhappy about? What is not working for you? What is missing? Understanding what is wrong? What is the issue? It's hard to fix a problem if you don't know what the problem is. So if you are currently feeling dissatisfied in your life and you want to make some changes, the very first step is identifying what isn't working for me. And you can identify, is it your environment? Is it your job? Is it the ways that you are showing up? Is it a relationship? Is it a friendship? Is it, the lack thereof of any of those things? Like, what is it? Nobody is living in your skin with you. Nobody is walking through your life as you, but you. So seeking that external guidance from people, wanting their advice, even seeking it from me, is only going to get you so far, because I'm not living your life. I'm not in the day-to-day with you. I don't know how it feels in your body to move throughout your life the way it is. Only you do. And you have to be the one to identify what is and isn't working for you. So once you've identified, okay, these are the things that I am not loving, it's then really important to identify, how is it that I want to feel? And I phrase it that way. How do you want to feel as opposed to where do you want to go or what do you want to do? Because picking up and moving and doing those things is not always feasible. It can take a really long time to get to that point. And you don't want to make yourself miserable waiting for something that could take a really long time to come to fruition or that may not necessarily be even necessary to come to fruition. So understanding how is it that you want to feel? If you think you want to move somewhere, if you think you want a career change, what is it that moving to that place or making that career change, what does that do for you? What is the feeling that you are hoping to gain from doing that thing? And if you can't identify what you want that feeling to be is, then you really need to do some reflection and figure out, okay, I understand what is bugging me and I understand what is not feeling good, but I need to get crystal clear on what would feel good. How do I want to feel every day? And what would make me feel fulfilled and satisfied? Because when you're able to identify that, then you are able to start taking steps towards that from wherever you are. And it may not entail a move. It may not entail a drastic career change. It actually might entail some really small tweaks that can improve your quality of life drastically. But again, it's really going to require some of that inner reflection and that inner work. So those are the two things that I really recommend examining before you make any drastic decisions, before you do anything else. What is the issue? What is wrong? What is bugging you? What is not feeling good to you? And what is the feeling that you would like to have instead? So those are foundational things. I'm going to give you some homework to journal about those two things after you listen to this episode. So once you get that under control, then you can start making some moves to figuring out, okay, where is it that I want to be? What is it that I want to do? And how can I start over? And this is now the point where I want to talk a little bit more about my personal story and some ways that I have started over in my life. And my most drastic forms of starting over, as I mentioned, have been with relocating. So I moved to Los Angeles from my hometown, Seattle, in 2019, right after I turned 30. And then about 6 months ago, at the age of 34, I relocated from there to New York. And those have been really big, drastic changes. And if you have not heard my story, or if you don't know much about me or my background, then it may just seem like I just up and did these things, or it was easy. And that definitely wasn't the case. There was so much behind it in terms of work and obstacles that I had to overcome and ways that I had to change and reframe my mindset and understand what it is that I'm looking for. So I want to walk you through a little bit of my story so that you can kind of hear how that worked for me. Again, not saying that you need to do these things, but sometimes it can help just to hear examples of how someone else did it. So for context, like I said, I'm from the Seattle area, born, raised, stayed there for college, stayed there after college, and spent my entire 20s there within, a few mile radius of where I grew up the first 30 years of my life. And I didn't feel good in that environment once I reached adulthood. And my 20s were a really, really challenging time where I felt very dissatisfied in my life. As I was talking about earlier, like, what is the issue? What is the dissatisfaction? I was in a state of dissatisfaction for a really long time, and it took me years to be able to identify what my issue was with how my lifestyle was, because I don't think that any place is inherently bad. I have so much love and appreciation for my hometown. I don't think it's a bad place. I know so many people who have moved there and who have loved it because it serves them and what they need at that time. Or other jobs that I had or companies that I worked for are not inherently bad places, but for what I desired from that season in my life, it just wasn't working. So my 20s were very much in that space of me feeling like I didn't like what I was doing. I didn't like where I was, but I couldn't really pinpoint what it was that I didn't like. After doing a lot of reflection, after doing a lot of job hopping and soul searching and getting into things like meditation and journaling and personal development and taking time to get to know myself better, I was able to identify what wasn't working for me in that environment and in the life that I had created for myself as a young adult in my 20s. So, a few of those things. One were my career. I was in a very corporate space, which was not necessarily my intention or what I had aspired to do, but was something that I felt I needed to do out of survival. I started working corporate when I was in college and I stayed for a really long time because I was just very focused on survival. I was very focused on earning. I have a low income background. I don't have financial support outside of myself. And so from about halfway through college on, my sole focus was financial security and getting whatever job I could to make as much money as I needed to make. And that was a huge focus for me. And with that, I sacrificed enjoyment. I sacrificed interest. I took on things like jobs that were really unfulfilling. I had things like really long commutes that I hated and was in a lot of workplaces where I just felt like I didn't belong and I felt really misunderstood. And when I started doing reflection on what wasn't working for me, I realized it came down to a couple of really big things. One, I personally value work that is creative, and I was working in very corporate environments, very finance heavy environments that were not necessarily creative. And I wasn't able to do things that kept me engaged and interested. I was really, really bored. The other thing is I'm someone who really values my time and who really values control over my time. So my biggest struggle in corporate America was feeling like I didn't have control over my time. I hated that someone else was dictating where I had to be, when I had to be, how long I sat at my desk. I hated that I had a super long commute and I felt like hours of my day were going to sitting in traffic. And I hated the lack of control out of my time. I hated the flexibility because flexibility and freedom over my time and choosing to spend my time how I want to spend it is something that is just a very core value to me. It is something that I value so much, almost more than security. And I just had to do a lot of soul searching to realize that. Like, I would be willing to give up a little bit of security to have more flexibility and freedom over my time. I do not think everybody should do that. And I don't think everybody feels that way or needs that. There are people who feel all different types of ways. But again, when I was doing the exercise of soul searching and figuring out what do I need, that flexibility and autonomy over my time was a huge one. The ability to do creative work that I genuinely cared about, not just like an assignment that an executive decided was going to be important. So then I had to pretend like it was important. Like, those things just don't resonate with how my brain works. And when I identified that, it took a really long time between me realizing that and no longer having to work in those environments. But when I understood that that was my personal problem, that was what didn't work for me, it actually was really freeing because it gave me something that I could work towards. Then I was able to start making career moves towards something that would be a better fit for me because I understood what didn't work. So that was like a huge, huge aha moment for me. And then on the other side of that coin, when I was thinking about how I wanted to feel like I had autonomy over my time. I wanted to feel like there was no limit to how much I could earn and what I could do. And if I was invited to something or if I got an opportunity, I wanted to be able to say yes without having to ask someone for permission. I wanted to create a life for myself where I was not having these long, terrible commutes where I was spending hours every single day in traffic. It was very important to me to create a lifestyle where I had flexibility and freedom to do so. Now, there was a gap of about 10 years in between me realizing that that's what I needed and me actually getting it. So I say that to say, sometimes it's not overnight. Just because you identify what does and doesn't work for you, that doesn't mean that you're going to change your life overnight. And it has taken me so long to get to the point where I feel like I've designed a life that feels better. And I still don't feel like I've gotten to where I'm going or I've reached every goal, but I have been able to design a type of day that just feels a lot better for what works for me, for how my brain works, for how my body works, for how I personally like to operate. The other thing that I was really struggling with outside of my career was just my environment. My hometown, although it is a bigger, a city, it's not like a tiny town, but it is a pretty small city compared to some of the other bigger cities in the world. you do tend to run into the same people all the time. You do tend to do the same things over and over. There is kind of a lot of repetition there. It is not necessarily a place where creativity is particularly fostered and celebrated, or even where there's a lot of opportunity to grow in a creative career. Great place if you want to work in tech, if you want to work in manufacturing, if you want to work, in those very corporate settings. There's so much opportunity there, and that is fantastic for the people who want that. But for me, I had started leaning more into content. I had started leaning more into media. I realized that I wanted to follow a more creative path, and there just weren't opportunities to do that there. And there also weren't other people who I could connect with and fellowship who were successful at the things that I wanted to be successful at. And so being in that environment, it caused my worldview and my whole perspective of what was possible to be really, really small, because I just didn't see other people being successful at the things that I was interested in. I didn't have peers who I could aspire to want to be like. And so I stayed really stagnant and really small for a really long time. And I also felt like there was just more experiences to life that I wanted to have. I wanted to experience being in bigger cities and being pushed a little bit more and having a little bit more culture to be immersed around and having more creative outlets. And that just wasn't available to me in the environment that I was in. And for my whole 20s, every year I would say, next year I'm going to move. Next year I'm going to move. And I did that for about 8 years until I actually did it. And I could have done it sooner. And one of my regrets is not really trying sooner. I had a lot of fear of failure, fear of stepping outside of my comfort zone, fear of not being able to financially support myself, that I really had to overcome to get to that point. Now, although I did stay in my hometown for longer than I personally think I should have, again, I'm only speaking from my experience. I don't think there's anything wrong with other people choosing to be wherever it is they want to be. I do think that there were some things that I did in my 20s that actually did lend themselves really well to my ability to start over later on in life. And there were some key milestones in my 20s of habits that I implemented and things that I started doing that I can see really laid the foundation for where I am today. So the first would be exercise, having a consistent exercise practice. And I talk about this all of the time, almost every episode, almost every post on social media, and you're probably going to be sick of hearing me talk about it. And I'm going to say it again. I don't care if you're sick of it, because it's true. I would not have the confidence to take the risks that I have taken and to create the version of life that I have now, or any future versions of my life that are coming, if I did not have a consistent exercise practice. When I was younger, before I started consistently exercising, I was the most fearful, avoidant, risk averse, insecure person. I would not take one step outside of any line. I would not color outside of any line because I was so fearful of anything and everything. And I had no belief in myself that if I took any sort of risk, that I would succeed. That was me my entire life up until about my early 20s. And a big turning point for me, although I had, of course, exercised before that, a really big turning point when I was about 22 years old was I ventured into the weight room and I started strength training. And that, for me at that time, as a very timid person, was a really big leap of courage, because the gym is intimidating if you don't know what you're doing. Going into the weight room, especially back then, there weren't as many women strength training or talking about strength training as there are now. So you're around a bunch of dudes and things are heavy and it's scary and you don't know what to do and you don't know if you're going to hurt yourself or what's going on. That was a really big kind of step of faith for me, to take time and to research and to learn how to lift weights and to learn how to strength train and to get over that fear of, being able to step into that intimidating environment. And once I started getting a little bit better at that, I then started wondering, well, what else can I do? Okay, this was intimidating and this was scary, but I did it and I'm here and now I'm getting better and now I'm getting stronger. So maybe I can take a little step and try this, or maybe I can take a little step and try that. I can say without a shadow of a doubt, I would not be sitting here doing this podcast if I did not start lifting weights that's 15 years ago. It has had that big of an impact on my life. And that's not to say that I think everybody should be lifting weights because it's very important for your health. But that's not to say that everybody needs to start doing that. It's to say that there are little things, little habits that you can implement in your life today that will set the stage for who you become tomorrow. Anytime you step into something that might be a little bit intimidating or a little bit scary, you are literally making a deposit that will help you learn how to believe in yourself. And there is a direct correlation between me being willing to step into that weight room in 2012 to me being willing to move across the country and start a whole new life in 2023, which is what I did. And so that was a really big first step that prepared me. So when I say that there's no change that's too big or too small, if you cannot pick up and move across the country tomorrow, that is okay. But what can you do from where you're at? What can you do to overcome one small fear and let that compound until you are at a place where you feel confident to make the moves that you want to make? So that was the first big step that I took that really helped me move later on. I would say, in addition to that, starting my first blog. I started off as a blogger. I've actually been in this content game for about 10 years now. And I started a blog in 2014. It was called The Balance Berry. And there are even some of you listening who have been following me since way back then. And I so greatly appreciate it. But that was my first foray into content creation before so many people I knew were doing it. And it was scary. It was scary to put that out there. It was scary to press publish on my first blog post. It was scary to change my Instagram handle to Balance Berry and start posting, fitness content, which was what I was doing. People absolutely judged me, especially in 2014, child. It wasn't, nowadays it's like everybody wants to be a content creator. 2014, it was such a weird thing to do. People absolutely made fun of me. People absolutely talk shit about me. I was terrified of what other people thought, but I also felt so convicted that I wanted to be creative, that I wanted to have something to share, that I felt like I had knowledge that could be helpful to other people. And that to me became more important than the opinions of what other people thought or how other people thought that I should live my life or use my skills. And again, something as small as starting a blog. Starting a blog is pretty easy. You can do it in like 10 minutes. It's not a big undertaking. I just Googled like how to start a blog and followed the instructions and there it was. So something that just took a few minutes again changed the trajectory of my life because it was just a willingness to take a really small step to do something a little bit differently and to not let the opinions of other people hinder an idea or a desire that I had. And although that blog didn't end up being particularly successful, it was the creation of that blog that led to this very podcast and that has led to me, having a lot of opportunities and doing a lot of different things. So sometimes it is just that first step. And that blog wasn't the thing. It wasn't the thing that took off. It wasn't the thing that made me a lot of money or that was some great venture, but it got me just a little bit closer to what was. And so that makes it super valuable and worth doing. And then I would say the next thing and the last thing that I did in my 20s was when I was 29. It was New Year's Eve going into 2019. I started reflecting on the decade that I was leaving behind. A lot of people in their late 20s, as they're heading into turning 30, you just start thinking a lot about your life and am I where I want to be? Am I not? I had spent a few years before that really beating myself up for not being where I wanted to be. But when I was 29 in late 2018, something really clicked in my brain and it said, if you are okay 10 years from now, when you're 39 going on 40, if you are okay with being exactly where you are right now, literally and figuratively, keep doing what you're doing. And if you're not, you need to make some changes. And I realized that if I did not start making steps towards the career that I wanted, if I did not make that step to moving because I already had the desire to do it, it was already on my heart, it was an intention that I had, I was just too scared to do it. I realized if I don't move now, I am not going to. And with that, I set the intention and I said, okay, we're going to move. And for reasons that are not super clear, I felt really drawn to Los Angeles. I went there for the first time at the age of 9. I loved it. I came home, told my parents when I grow up, I'm going to move there. And I just never really let it go. I had visited several times over the years and I just really enjoyed it there. And I enjoyed who I was when I was there. So when it was time for me to move, LA was always at the top of my list because I liked how I felt when I was there. Again, remember chasing that feeling. So that was my intention. I was like, okay, we're going into 2019. 2019 is going to be the year that I move to LA and I'm actually going to do it. And to set the stage for you, where I was at in 2019, I was broke, the brokest of the broke. I was a social media manager at a startup, which was not a great work experience. I had a really low salary. And I mean, Seattle's an expensive city. And I had a really, really low salary. I was super broke, not particularly happy in the work that I was doing, didn't have a lot of connections. I honestly didn't know how I was going to make my way to LA because the salary that I had at that time was barely enough to get by in Seattle, let alone enough to get by in LA. I didn't really know how to look for an apartment. I didn't know where to start with looking for a job, but I just had this unwavering belief that that was the year that it was going to happen. And so what I did was I called up my friend Claire, shout out to Claire, and she has a professional organizing business. And I called her up and I said, hey, Happy New Year. We're about to enter 2019. I really have the intention of moving this year. Can you help me begin editing my stuff so that when I move in the fall, because that was when, my lease was ending, when I move in the fall, I want it to be really easy for me to be able to just pack up my car and go. I don't want to have a bunch of stuff to deal with. And the only thing that I could think to do at that time to help me get closer to moving was paring down my stuff and tending my space. So she came over earlier in the day on New Year's Eve going into 2019, and we went through a bunch of my stuff and we got rid of stuff, and we would repeat that every couple of months until it was time to move. And that was really the first step that I took towards moving. Fast forward a few months later, and I started having things move into place. I had another friend who reached out. She was like, hey, my team at work is hiring marketing writers. Do you know anybody who would be interested? And I was like, girl, I would be interested because I knew that she worked fully remote. She really enjoyed the job. It was super flexible for her. And that was what I wanted. Ultimately, I knew I really wanted to be self-employed, but financially I wasn't there yet. So I was like, okay, if I can have a stable job that is remote and is super flexible, I don't have to go into an office, I don't have to commute, that's going to get me closer to that freedom and flexibility that I so value. So girl, tell me where to apply. And, by the grace of God, I got an offer for that job. And that was in July of 2019. I accepted an offer in that job. It was fully remote and it was a nice pay bump from the job that I had previously had where I was making $0. It was enough for me to be able to get by based on the research that I had done moving to LA and how much money I would need to make, not living alone, but just how much money I would need to make. I realized I would have enough money to, be able to pay my rent and have a little bit of wiggle room with that salary. So I was like, cool. Great. Accepted that job offer in July of 2019. My deadline for moving was the beginning of September. That was when I had to be out of my place in Seattle. Also in July 2019, I was talking to another friend, about my intention to move to LA. And she was like, well, did you see that Laura just posted an Instagram story that she's looking for a roommate? She already has an apartment in LA. Her old roommate moved out. She's looking for someone to move in. You should reach out to her. And I'm like, bet. So, reach out to our friend from college. And I was like, girl, I'm trying to move to LA. This is when my lease is up. Like, if you're still looking for a roommate, I would love to be considered. And she was like, absolutely. I would love to have you. Do you want to come visit? Do you want to check it out? It just so happened that I had a trip coming up, going to LA a few weeks after that because I was going to speak at an event. And I was like, yeah, I'm coming in a few weeks. I would love to check it out. I was able to stay at the apartment there so that I could just get a feel for the neighborhood and the space. And did I like it? And I spent a few days, working from coffee shops and trying to find a new flow and routine. And it ended up working out. And it was right in my budget and it came into place. And so, a month before I needed to be out of my place that I was living in, I had a remote job that I was able to do from anywhere. And I had the opportunity to move into an apartment in that city. And I recognize what huge blessings that was. I feel like God was like, here you go. You set the intention, you started putting things in motion. Here you go. And I was so, so lucky to have had it work out that way. It doesn't mean that I was not terrified. So, as I mentioned, my friend Claire and I had edited my things down. By the time it was time for me to move, it was me, my parents, and as much stuff as I could fit in my car at the time driving down to LA. And I remember the whole drive down there being absolutely terrified and thinking, what have I done? This is so scary. I don't know if I can do this. I'm terrified. I just remember thinking, what have I done over and over and over, and being so afraid of that risk that I was about to take. And looking back on it, I'm so, so glad that I did, because life there wasn't perfect. I had my ups and I had my downs, but being in that environment absolutely helped me grow and evolve and change as a person in the ways that were necessary to do in my life. And that drive down to LA was the week after my 30th birthday. So I started off my 30s with a bang, with a big change, and embarked on a whole new chapter. And even though living in LA wasn't a forever thing for me, at least not at that time, I don't know. Who knows? Maybe I'll go back. Maybe I won't. I don't know. I'm keeping it open. But it was such a pivotal time in my life where I grew so much, and being able to take that big of a step and create a new life for myself somewhere else helped me grow in immense ways that then made me be like, okay, I figured this out. I landed on my feet. It wasn't perfect. I had things that went well. I had things that didn't go well, but I was able to figure it out. And what that experience taught me is that it's pretty rare that a decision is either right or wrong. School teaches us that there is an answer, right? When you are doing a math problem, there is an answer. When you are writing an essay, there is something the teacher wants to hear. Something is either right or something is either wrong, and we get so afraid of making the wrong decision. But oftentimes in life, most decisions are somewhere in between. They're not necessarily right or wrong. They just are what they are. And if you make a decision and you don't like where it leads you, it doesn't mean that it was wrong. It means, okay, now it's time to do something else. Now it's time to pivot and figure out, why isn't this working? And again, what is that feeling that I want to have? And that is very much how I feel about moving to LA. I was there for about 4 years. I had moments that were really freaking hard, and I had moments that were really, really beautiful. And it was expensive and it was humbling. And I grew and I learned and I got my heart broken and I had so many things happen. But I don't think that it was a wrong decision. I think that it was information. And I'm able to take that information and I'm able to move forward to the next decision. And if I make a decision that ends up being a detour, it doesn't mean that I took the wrong turn. It means that I took a scenic route and that it might take me a little bit longer to move on to the next thing. But being in a city like LA helped me expand in so many ways, personally and professionally. I was in a city where there were a lot of people who were creatively successful, and it helped me expand what was possible. It helped me be a lot more abundant because I saw people being really successful doing similar things as me. And all of a sudden, I didn't feel weird or like I was asking for too much. I saw something to aspire to, and I was able to really put in the work to rise to the occasion. I saw so many leaps and bounds with my relationship with money during that time, and I made so much progress in my own financial wellness. Being there was when I paid off my student loans. It was when I got Balanced Black Girl to a point where it was a real business, and it created the stage for me to do so many things that I don't know if I would have done in my prior environment. So even though it wasn't for forever, it was still so, so valuable. And then in 2022, I started getting the ping again. Like I just wanted to have more experiences. And at that time, I didn't necessarily think that I was going to leave LA, but I did want to take a break from the city for a little bit to travel and just have more experiences and do more things, because also being there during the pandemic was really, really hard. LA is already a very isolating space, but when you are there and you don't know a lot of people, and then you're confined to your house and everything is locked down, about half my time there was spent in that state. And that was really, really hard. And so I just felt really confined to this little bubble that I had been living in during the pandemic. And I just wanted to explore a little bit more. I wanted to do some of the things that I really wanted to do in my 20s, but that I felt too afraid to do then. And with that new confidence of moving to a new city and doing these things that I had been too scared to do, I finally felt ready. And so in 2022, I started mapping out a plan for my twinissance, as I call it. My friend Dominique and I called it our twinissance because we started doing things in our 30s that we really wanted to do in our 20s, but we're too afraid to. And I started mapping out what that looked like. And I realized, when I was in college, I really wanted to study abroad and I didn't get to do it. So I planned out, this extended solo trip for myself that was doing all of the things that I really wanted to do in college, but couldn't, and trips with my friends. And I invested more in going to conferences. I went to a few conferences in 2023 and I mapped out what are the events that I want to go to? What are the things I want to speak at? And I started pitching myself to speak at those things. And I started saving my money to plan. I wanted to come and do kind of an extended trip in New York because I just thought that it would be really fun. I actually didn't have any intention of moving here, but I just thought it would be a good time. And so in 2022, I started really mapping those things out. And I mapped out what 2023 would look like. I started saving my money. I started booking flights. I started looking at, okay, what would it cost to put my stuff in storage? And if I have my stuff in storage and I'm not paying rent, how much of that money will then free me up to travel and do the things that I want to do? So I started mapping out that process about a year before I did it. And so come spring 2023, I then executed that plan. I put my stuff in storage, I traveled, and I started, having those experiences that I really wanted to have. And then the culmination of that was I was supposed to end that time with my trip to New York. And then ideally, I would have moved back to LA was my initial plan after I had these experiences and kind of stepped outside of my bubble for a little bit. And as life would have it, that's not exactly how it worked out. So I did end up coming to New York again, got really lucky with a friend of mine posting that she was looking for someone to stay in her apartment while she was away. Ended up staying at her place for a while. Really hitting a stride and a groove here, started building community. It was me being here was really good for the podcast. And I just felt a good groove. I liked how I felt here. It woke me up in really important ways and pushed me and challenged me in ways that I hadn't been challenged in a while. And I ended up finding an apartment that opened up like right when I would have needed to decide where I was going to move, and I was able to step into it. And I'm realizing as I'm saying that out loud, it can be so easy to say, well, easy for you to say less. You just keep having friends who post about stuff and then you just do it or you just step into it. But I think that is the power of setting an intention and being a solution-oriented person and having a solution-oriented mindset. I am not special. I am not somebody who has come from a lot of resources or who has some major network, but I am someone who has learned how to set an intention and who has learned to start taking action from wherever I am to get to where I want to go. And then when I start doing that, I begin to see opportunities to execute left and right. So that is my story of how I've started over a few times in my life now, particularly focusing on my moves because those have been the biggest changes in my life. And I want to talk a little bit more specifically about the mindset things and the habits that I have adopted that have made those things possible for me. Because even if you don't necessarily have a friend that you can move out in with or have a friend who refers you to a job, all of these things are possible for you if you learn how to start seeing solutions instead of problems. I put on my Instagram story the day before I'm recording this, a question box saying, hey, y'all, I'm doing an episode about how to start over in your 30s. Let me know if you have any topics that you want me to touch on in the episode. And people are writing in great things that are factors that you have to absolutely consider. Money was the biggest one. Lots of things of, I haven't been able to save in a while. How do I handle finances? How do you afford to move to a new city? Or I'm financially responsible for my siblings. How can I afford to start over when that happens? A lot of people talking about just fear and being afraid. How do you get over imposter syndrome to learn how to believe in yourself? And a lot of things. And as I was reading through those responses of super valid things, and a lot of those things, I'm like, that was exactly how I felt, particularly in my 20s before I made these moves. The biggest shift for me is to not see those things as obstacles, but to start focusing on solutions. Money is tight for everybody right now. Life is expensive for everybody right now, and it's not getting any less expensive. If you have financial obligations of people who you are helping to take care of, that is not going to magically go away. Where are you going to find solutions to make your responsibilities still happen while making your desires come true? And I'm not saying that it's easy. It is freaking hard. I know it is hard. I single-handedly paid off 6 figures of student loan debt and have been financially supporting myself since I was 16. I know it's hard and I know it's expensive. But when we learn to start looking for solutions, that unlocks doors of what's possible. The only way, if money is like really tight and an issue for you right now, that you can afford to do something like this is to make more of it. And I know it's like, duh, less, obviously. But that's the truth. It is obvious. It is simple, but it's not easy. But when you start looking at, okay, instead of seeing this as an obstacle, I am going to start looking for solutions to this, then you can start making things happen. So let's say you want to move to a new city, money is tight, and you want to figure out how you're going to navigate that. What I recommend you do is do some research about that city that you want to move to. Look up average income, look up average price of housing, look up some neighborhoods that you would want to live in and go on Street Easy and look at how much the apartments or the houses or whatever are going for and start doing some math to figure out, okay, this is how much it costs to live there. This is how much the taxes are. This is how much the average XYZ is. Calculate it and figure out, okay, this is how much I need to be making. And if there is a gap between how much you're making and how much you need to get there, then start coming up with some solutions for how you're going to fill that gap. And it sounds so like duh, but this is literally what I had to do. I had to map out on a piece of paper, okay, this is what I'm making to live where I want to live. I need to be here. What can I do to bridge that gap? And for me, it was taking on extra jobs, and it was selling some stuff, and it was freelancing, and it was doing things that I didn't necessarily want to do and that were so obnoxious and freaking capitalistic, and I hate it. And unfortunately, that is the system that we are in. And it's probably not going to be changing in the amount of time that you want to make a change and start over. So beginning to see solutions. If you are wanting to make a move, but you are also financially responsible for your siblings, okay, then how much are you contributing to that each month? How much do you need to get to where you want to be? That is your new North Star to shoot for. And start coming up with some solutions to bring it in and to make it happen. And I know it's freaking hard. The job market sucks. It's hard, but it's not impossible. Again, what is it that you want more? Do you want to stay stuck, or do you want to find solutions? And when you start focusing on finding solutions, the solutions will come. But it's all about being willing to look for them. One of the examples that was super relevant for me was when I was living in LA, my roommate who I'd been living with at the time had decided that she wanted to relocate to another state. And so that meant that we were going to lose that, like cheap rent controlled apartment that I was sharing with another person, and that my housing costs were going to increase quite a bit. Thankfully, she gave a lot of notice, so I had some months to figure it out. And when I was doing my research of like, okay, when I move out of this apartment, this is where I want to live. This is about how much it's going to cost for me to rent a 1-bedroom that I'm paying for on my own. I set a very specific amount of like this, I need to be making at least this much, and this is what I am shooting for. And then I started doing a lot of freaking work to get there. I read a couple of books that were really, really helpful. One was called, I believe, Secrets of Six-Figure Women, and the other was called Worthy in Boost Your Self-Worth to Grow Your Net Worth. That second book, Worthy, was particularly the biggest game changer for me because it is, one, a great book with information, but it has amazing prompts all throughout to help you improve your relationship with money and find more opportunities to earn more and to be more abundant from where you are. And I kid you not, I had been working on this for a few months leading up to making more money, trying to take on more freelance work and content and all those things to earn more so that I could get this new apartment. The morning that I finished that book, Worthy, I'll link it in the show notes, and did the very last journal prompt, I did it during my morning routine, finished the book. logged on to work that morning, had a meeting notice from my manager for first thing in the morning. I hop on this meeting with her. She tells me that I got promoted. I got a pay bump that was exactly how much money I needed to be making to get that new apartment the morning that I finished that book. And it, to me, was the biggest mind blown moment that I still am so shook by and couldn't believe. But I truly think that it happened because I took the step to find solutions and to find resources to get to where I needed to be. I knew how much I needed to earn, and I was trying to do anything I could from where I was at to make it happen. And so when you start doing that, things will open up for you. And again, it's simple, but it's not easy, and it will take time, and it might be hard, but it's worthwhile. You are worth doing hard things for. You are worth having what you want, but sometimes you are going to have to finesse and finagle and play the game a little bit, but it's absolutely worth it. So I highly, highly recommend getting crystal clear. What is it that you need? How much do you need to earn? What is standing in your way? And how can you start finding solutions instead of just identifying problems? Now, another question or comment that I got from a lot of people was they just felt a lot of concern around, well, what if I disappoint people? Or what if I disappoint my family? Or my family has a lot of ideas about what I should be doing for work or where I should be at this age. And I think that that is really freaking hard, especially if there is a cultural component to it, especially if you have, let's say, immigrant parents who sacrificed a lot to get you where you are. And culturally, there are just expectations to have certain occupations and do certain things. I am absolutely not going to tell you like, oh, it doesn't matter what they think. Do what you want anyways, because it's not that easy. That is when I think you need to go back to that. How do you want to feel then? If you truly feel like you are unable to maybe change your career, to change whatever, because your family just wouldn't go for it, what is it that you want to feel, and how can you chase that feeling from where you're at? And how can you start taking tiny steps towards feeling how it is that you want to feel? It is really hard to balance the expectations of others while simultaneously you are the only one living your life. And both of those things can coexist at the same time. But remember, ultimately, you are the one living in your skin. You are the one who feels the way you feel. So, how can you kind of maintain steady what you've got going while leaning more into the feelings that you want to have? And that may not be a big drastic career change at first. That may not be a big move at first. Maybe that is a hobby. Maybe that is building community with new people. Maybe that is finding another way to express yourself that feels a little bit more creatively fulfilling while you hold down the fort at home. What ways can you get creative to feel how you want to feel and to have the life that you want? Again, remember, if we're starting over, we're looking for solutions. We're not looking for reasons to stay stuck. And if you're someone who maybe you're afraid of that, or you're afraid of feeling like you're behind or like you should be doing certain things, but you don't have that, family expectation or cultural expectations, congratulations, because that is a lot easier to navigate. If it's just you feeling like, well, I should be here at a certain point, or I should be doing this, or I should be doing that, or it's too late. That's not true. It's never too late. The only thing in our lives that is more time sensitive is our fertility as birth givers. That is time sensitive. I can't change biology. That is what it is. And if you have the desire to experience pregnancy and give birth to children, then you're going to have to get really specific and really, hone in on what matters to you and when, and do the best you can with what you have to navigate that particular part of life, because that is truly the only thing where, yes, like time does matter. However, we also don't necessarily fall off a cliff at the age of 35 the same way we've been taught. So it's both and. You can't necessarily do that for forever, and there are options and there are ways to explore that if that is really important to you. Everything else under the sun, it does not matter how old you are. Literally nothing else under the sun. in terms of a career change, in terms of a relationship, in terms of a city, in terms of this, in terms of that, in terms of being behind, in terms of not. There's truly no such thing as being behind. Somebody else who has a different job than you, or who maybe has a certain relationship, or who maybe has children, or who maybe makes a certain amount of money is not ahead of you, because there's no such thing as being ahead. None of those things make anybody further along or not. They are experiences that we consent to having, ideally, or experiences that we opt into having. Having a different experience, or again, taking a detour, doesn't mean that you are behind. But if there are things that are truly so important to you and are truly on your heart to do and have and experience, the time is going to pass anyway. So you may as well get the life that you want. If you do want to go back to school and you're worried about being 40 and in school, well, Lord willing, at some point you're going to be 40 anyway. So you may as well go back to school and do what you want. Do you want to then be 50 and having never done what it is you want to do, or 60 or whatever? There's truly nothing under the sun outside of that whole fertility thing that is bound by time. And learning to release this idea of being ahead or being behind or being on time or being not has been such a freeing realization. And something that really helped me with that was actually the passing of my grandmother. My granny, who I was really close with, passed right after I turned 30, or a few months after I turned 30. She was in her mid 80s. And when she passed, I remember thinking, wow, I hope that I get to live as long as she did. If I do, that's 5.5 decades from now. And here I am being newly 30, feeling like my life is over because I haven't done so many things. But Lord willing, I hopefully get 5.5 decades to do all this stuff. So let me get to doing it. We are trying to cram 8 decades worth of life into the 1 decade that is our 20s. And then we beat ourselves up if and when it doesn't turn out how we think, when really life is meant to be lived. Life is meant to be long, and we can't beat ourselves up all the way through it. So when we learn to give ourselves more grace with our timelines, and if there is something that does have a more firm timeline, then again, putting on that super solution oriented mindset and figuring out how can we do the best we can to get to where we want to be with what we have, it is so empowering and it is so freeing. And I think that we have the ability to start over time and time again, no matter how old we are, by shifting to new perspectives and by being willing to be open to new things and learning new information. There is so much that's out there that could be available to you, or work that you could love that doesn't even exist yet. So are you going to deny yourself of that just because you didn't do it by age 30? You know what I mean? It's just, it's silly the ways that society makes us feel like we have all of these timelines and deadlines for all of these things that are really meant to be experienced. They're meant to be information. They are meant to be part of what makes us who we are. But it's not a right decision or it's not a wrong decision. It is just information that you can choose to do what you want to do with it. So if you are wanting to make that move, if you're wanting to make that change, if you are wanting to adjust and pivot, get out a pen, get out a piece of paper, get clear on what it is that you want, and start breaking down a plan to make it happen. And don't feel like you need to do everything at once. I also had a lot of people write in and say, well, I want to move, but I'm nervous about money. I'm nervous about finding a job. I'm nervous about building community. And I'm like, why are you stressing over building community for a place that you don't even live yet? Focus on your bare needs. So if you want to move to a new city, the first things you need to figure out are job and housing. Those are the two essential things that will make or break your move. Worry about building community when you get there. You can build community anywhere. Anybody can. I fully believe that. But focus on what is right in front of you. Don't stress yourself out thinking that every aspect of your life has to change. What is the next best step? And then take the next best step after that. And then the next best step after that. And when you start doing that, you will be surprised at how much life opens up for you and how much life conspires to help you be exactly who you're meant to be. Okay, so that is what I have for you today in terms of my how to start over in your 30s, or really any time at life. I hope that this episode was helpful for you. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, head to my latest Instagram post and let me know either what your favorite part was or one way that you are looking forward to starting over. I would love to hear from you. I would love to cheer you on. Again, if you have not subscribed to the podcast, please make sure you subscribe to Balanced Black Girl. I do new episodes every Tuesday. It's a solo episode summer, so I'm coming at you every week, just you and me. And I would love to see you next week. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss it. Leave a rating and a review. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.